Palestinians pride themselves on the fact that historic Palestine always had a very multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious base. The book is divided by the decades of the Nakba. And the reason that I did that is to remind the reader over and over and over again that you can't talk about the situation on the ground in Palestine without recognizing the very significant history of the Nakba. Everything that we address for Palestinians, we're actually addressing for all of humanity. Before I get started, I do have a PowerPoint prepared to share some things with you, but I do want to mention that my book, Crossing Borders, The Search for Dignity in Palestine, its very structure points the reader to the experience of the Nakba. In every section, the book is divided by the decades of the Nakba. And the reason that I did that is to remind the reader over and over and over again that you can't talk about the situation on the ground in Palestine without recognizing the very significant history of the Nakba and the dispossession of Palestinians from their homeland and the ongoing subjugation of Palestinians in their homeland. I think what I'll do is get started with my presentation, and then we can delve into that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. A lot of people ask me, who are you to write this book, and why do you care so much about Palestine? And so I'm going to answer that question first. And then I'm going to get into some of the historical context. That's one of the things that my book brings to the table, is the historical context of the situation on the ground. You can't really understand what's happening now without looking at that history. And talk somewhat about the current realities. And then I think it's really important to talk about visions for the future. A lot of people feel very dismayed in this current moment about how we can even talk about the future with the fact that things have never perhaps been worse or further from peace. So I'm going to go ahead and give you some background. So my father grew up under Nazi Germany. He came to the United States after World War II. He was a Hitler Youth participant by force. Of course, that was expected of all young boys, and so he served as a child soldier until the war ended, and then he came as a student to the United States and continued to go back to his native Germany every year as a professor, but he continued to live in the United States and then actually relocated after retirement and is no longer with us. So he came over to the United States on the ship. Just want to give you that context that for me, the history of Germany has so much to do with the fact that we have a state of Israel. Of course, Zionism is the core of how we have a state of Israel, but without the Holocaust, we don't know for sure what would have happened. But to just give you some context, I mostly grew up in the city of Detroit. And that's a city that experienced a rebellion in 1967 during the Civil Rights era. So that history was, I was very aware of that history growing up in the city of Detroit. My mother devoted her life to revitalizing the city after the total economic deprivation of the city following the Civil Rights time. So that's me and my mom just recently in Detroit, where they just opened a brand new park. So she's lived long enough, she's 88, to see the city bounce back. But growing up in the city, I was aware that not everyone has the same opportunities, and that I was also living on native land, that the history of Detroit goes back where Black people weren't allowed to live outside of certain areas like East and West Grand Boulevard. And so the theme of borders was part of my history very early on. And I did in college study in Germany, studied abroad, and that was during the Cold War. So Germany was divided, as was the city of Berlin. And so this is in Berlin with the Berlin Wall. I witnessed that wall in my lifetime come down. and I witnessed the apartheid wall in Israel go up. So I'm hoping to live long enough to see that wall be dismantled again. But while I was studying in Germany, I had the opportunity to visit a family in Jerusalem, a Jewish family who had just immigrated to Jerusalem through the law of return, became Israelis. And I had the opportunity to visit a family that I met from their son in Germany. My brother and I were invited to visit their family in Gaza, and they were refugees from the city of Jaffa, and of course barred from their right of return. That family remains in Gaza to this day as refugees in their own homeland. And that story of disconnect really sat with me. It's what kind of planted the seed for me to learn more about the situation. And it led me to the 5th commemoration of the Sabra and Shatila massacre after I came back from Germany. And that's where I met my husband at Wayne State University in Detroit, who was from a family of farmers in Jenin who had lost half of their village lands in 1948 with the Nakba, but were still living in their homes and on their land. So it was a very different situation. I spent some time in DC toward the end of my studies and got to see the way our elected officials very openly behind doors said to me that they could not really talk about this issue and get reelected. And so those were the days of speaking out against apartheid South Africa, but talking about Palestine and the Israeli occupation was off limits. And of course, that remains contentious to this day among our elected officials with the influence of AIPAC. So in spite of being disillusioned, I was in Germany when the Berlin Wall went down in 1989. They say without a shot being fired. We can only hope that the wall in Israel and Palestine goes down so quietly. And I also got to hear Nelson Mandela speak after the fall of apartheid. He came to Detroit and spoke at Tiger Stadium. And so those two historic events gave me hope that change is inevitable and that perhaps even one day we would see an opportunity where Palestinians could live with dignity in their homeland. And just to back up, this, as I said, Zionism started long before the Holocaust. So there was this, the first Zionist Congress in 1897 with Theodor Herzl. I got to go to Basel, Switzerland for the 120th anniversary, 0 events going on, but just to mark the place where actual people make decisions, hold events, and make history. He had said that day that in 50 years, we would see the state of Israel, and he was pretty much right on the money with that prediction. But he had his connections along with Chaim Weizmann to the British government, and that, of course, all led to the Balfour Declaration. And so there was this promise of a Jewish homeland. But it's important to remember that Zionism from the beginning was a plan to reconfigure Palestine into a Jewish state. And so that plan never changed. And the leaders of Zion and the Israeli government have followed through with that plan to this day. And that's what we're witnessing. Now, we've all heard the saying, a land without a people for a people without a land. The truth is, Palestine was never a land without a people. It had a vibrant economy of orange groves and fishing and all kinds of other incredible economic ventures, as well as cultural activities. And so it's important I know that Ilan Pappé has dismantled all these myths. That's one of them. So it's just important to remember that Palestine was never a land without a people. And so, but by the time the Holocaust came, and there was sympathy for, how to help the Jewish people, that really gave the impetus for that historic partition plan at the UN. And Palestinians were not approving of their land simply being partitioned at the time, and that's how we got to the Nakba. I know many of you are familiar with that history. And what I want to show you, and this is one of the things that you'll learn from my book, is that even though I've written a memoir, I include 20 maps in my book, and this is one of them. And the reason I include maps is because people throughout history who have the power to draw lines. So obviously someone sat and drew the lines of the partition plan and decided that these areas, the purple areas with darker purple areas where Jews had settled up until before the establishment of the State of Israel, that would be handed over to the Jews as a Jewish state, and that the rest of Palestine would become an Arab state. And that was decided at the UN on November 29th, which was just a few days ago. That day is commemorated as the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people for the reason that they did not approve of this partition, but it was forced onto them. And when war broke out, when the Zionist militias that were quite well fortified through their connections went ahead and decided to push through the plan, you can see on the right map that all those little dots are Palestinian villages that were destroyed. And you can see they're in the areas of the Jewish state, and that was to create a Jewish majority in those areas. So those Palestinians became refugees in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And so I think maps can really sometimes tell a story. Now, one of the things that's important to remember is that Jews owned 7% of the land in 1947. And so that's one of the reasons why Palestinians were like, we can't just give away half of our land. Why should we do that? And the irony is that, you know, Palestinians pride themselves on the fact that historic Palestine always had a very multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious base. And so Palestinians to this day pride themselves on the fact that people used to live together, and that the problem with this picture is imposing a Jewish state on another people and land. And so that's one of the core issues that is really the problem to this day. So I'm going to tell you, so this plan of Zionism to take over Palestine continued with the 1967 war, when Israel took over the rest of Palestinian areas of the West Bank and Gaza. And I'm going to just read you a passage from my book. When my father actually visited me while I was in Palestine, and this story addresses the fact that the villages of Yalo, Imwas, and Beit Nuba were wiped off the map in 67, and there were additional refugees. Israel took over the Jerusalem corridor, and that's where those villages were located, and made what is today called Canada Park. But this is from my memoir about that time when my father visited me. So this is 1998, the 50th year of the Nakba. In December, my father combines touring historical sites in Egypt, Jordan, and Israel with coming to visit Nasser's family and me, and Nasser is my husband. Though having traveled the world, it is his first and only trip to the Middle East. We never talk about how it feels for him as a German who served his fatherland as a child soldier to visit the Jewish homeland. He's focused on his lifelong passion of culture and art. He has taken me to numerous orchestral performances with Gidon Kramer, the famous Israeli violinist. And yet his favorite music of all time, the operas of Richard Wagner, are banned in Israel, given the Wagner family's affiliation with Hitler. I imagine he must admire the young Jewish state with all of its cultural offerings. At the same time, I want him to experience what I have come to know as Palestine, which exists in Israel's shadow. I want him to know the other side of the golden coin Israel has become. I want him to feel the loss, the heartache, and the struggle that befell the Palestinians when Israel was born. He has experienced the warmth and generosity of Nasser's family, traveled through Israeli checkpoints, and seen what Palestine is now. But I want to show him what he may otherwise not see. I take him to Yalo, one of 3 villages destroyed during the Six-Day War in 1967. I tell him about the fate of the hundreds of Palestinian villages destroyed during Israel's War of Independence, how hundreds of thousands of people were forced to leave their homes, how the villages are still there, but have become ghost towns or parks or grazing lands for the livestock of Israeli settlements. The dirt roads of the village are clear and open, the remnants of concrete and stone homes visible through the brush. The rains have yet to come, so the land is bone dry, the tall grasses of the previous season stiff, blending into the dusty dirt road as we drive through the village at a walking pace. Even though the season of sabr is long over, a few sabr, which are the cactus plants you see in this photo, are still flowering. I pull over when I spot pale yellow cup-shaped flowers in bloom growing out of the sabr to form a crown at the top of a cactus leaf, the clusters of leaves like the heads of fair maidens, gossiping and giggling in their youth, leaning into each other so that others cannot make out what they are saying. This miraculous display of life stands in stark contrast to the rubble nearby each prominent cluster. My eyes follow the natural borders of sabr, Palestinians planted between their properties. The clusters stand taller than the rubble of the homes between them. The still flowering crowns are a celebration of their resilience and a reminder that they bear witness to the destruction carried out only a few decades before. The older leaves that form the trunk are anchored to the earth. I watch them reminiscing about the lost life of the village while they patiently wait for the villagers to return. Even though the surrounding brush has turned golden brown and the dirt road to dust, like the dust of the villages in my throat. The bright green of the cactus leaves and the pale green and yellow crowns of sabr bear witness to the absence of those who once lived here. No wonder sabr is a Palestinian symbol of rootedness in the land. I examine the delicate flowers I'm meeting for the first time, though the grave silence reminds me of the voices I should hear. I explained to my father how this plant is an overt reminder of the life that once flourished here. In 1948, the year Israel declared statehood and destroyed over 500 Palestinian villages, is not that long ago. But 1967 is even more recent, the year I was born. It is my lifetime. While I was in my mother's womb, the Israeli army was wiping this village and neighboring Emwas and Beit Nuba off the map. Those driven out of these villages still have their whole lives ahead of them. Their village is not a distant memory passed down by their mothers and fathers. The silence is chilling. The rubble weighs on me as if it could bury me on the spot. I try to imagine their homes still standing, people coming and going, the sound of their voices, the aroma of midday meals traveling between their homes. I stare into the faces of the cactus flowers, full of gratitude that they faithfully show up each spring, and that I get to witness the sabr giving birth to itself against all odds. I feel as if I have uncovered a simple yet profound truth. My father listens as I speak, his body still, his gaze cast on what was once there. I don't know if he can see what I see or feel what I feel. I don't know if his heart aches at how history plays out here. Not everyone can see what is no longer there. I know my father as a practical man, someone who makes the best of what he has and keeps moving forward. Here I am asking him to look back for a moment and appreciate what fuels the fire of Palestinian determination to live in Palestine. After Yallo, I show my father the ruins of a church, the only remains of the nearby destroyed village of Emwas. I think of the countless ancient churches he took me to visit in Europe, the layers upon layers of history. Is it easier to accept how the landscape and the people that inhabit it change over time? How some civilizations cease to exist? How spaces are reconfigured and renamed when the history is completely buried? Here, the people of these ruins are still among us, and the rubble remains visible, not to mention the trees and plants they once cultivated, laced between destroyed homes. I'm inspired again to deepen my work to right the wrongs of history, first by acknowledging what happened and then exploring what is possible. The most memorable phrase from the Holocaust is never forget. So too is Palestinian memory, the starting point of a Palestinian future that moves beyond loss. Just as no one can ask the Jews to forget their suffering, Palestinians have a right, an obligation to keep their memories alive. They are forever woven into the fabric of their sense of self. What will it take for Israelis to acknowledge this living memory, to see it as part of their own story? So that chapter is a reminder, or I guess it's an illustration of how I talk about the Nakba in my book. You can see I'm not old enough to experience the Nakba, but by going to places that were destroyed and sharing them with my father, for example, I'm acknowledging those places, those names that have been erased, and also acknowledging the Naksa, which is translated as the setback, which is when Israel took over the rest of Palestine in 1967. As time goes on and we get to Oslo in the 1990s and we see how the West Bank is carved up into areas A, B, and C, which is further restricting Palestinians' access to their land. It's breaking up the continuity between communities. You know, Palestinian life is centered around cities that are surrounded by towns and villages. And so when you create something called Area C, that is under full Israeli control and the army, as is the whole land, honestly, you interrupt people's ability to get from place to place. You interrupt their lives, and of course, regionally, you interrupt their ability to be part of the larger Middle East, the Arab world. So this is another map that I feature in my book to show the ways in which lines are drawn and disrupt people's lives. And I'm sure you've seen this, at least this top picture of the way Palestine has shrunk over time. And some people compare that to what happened in the United States with the genocide against the Native American people across the Americas. So I'm just bringing that up as a shared historical narrative that I think makes the story of Israel compelling to many Americans, especially Christian Zionists who feel that that this is like a manifest destiny or something handed from God. I did spend some time, and there's a chapter in my book on Standing Rock, because I think it's really important to make those connections between stories of dispossession. And so when I was there, I did find a Palestinian flag, and it was also when Detroit was undergoing a water crisis in Flint, Michigan. And so there were people there from Michigan drawing attention to the fact that the water of the people of Standing Rock was under threat by the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. So the Nakba is not an event. It's something that is the ongoing Nakba. Zionism is determined to reconfigure Palestine into a Jewish state. You hear members of the Knesset speak today how Gaza is theirs. They need to annex the West Bank. It was an incremental takeover of someone else's land. It wasn't Jews fleeing to Palestine and living among the people there and sharing the land. It was all about taking over the land and redefining it as an exclusive Jewish state. And so the laws that Israel continues to pass are moving in that direction. And so all of the restrictions on movement, restrictions on economy, the fragmentation of Palestinians by their identity cards, and where they live and where they can travel or not travel is all part of that agenda. And of course, we can talk about home demolition, settler violence, the administrative detention, the torture and sexual violence in Israeli prisons and detention centers. This is what people are dealing with. And of course, the most horrific thing that we've witnessed is the genocide with the mass death and destruction of people in Gaza. And I'm sure you've seen photos of how Gaza has literally been flattened. It was not about destroying Hamas, it's about destroying life in Gaza as we knew it, and offering Palestinians quote unquote voluntary migration to go somewhere else and live happily ever after, just not in Palestine. And of course, for Palestinians, that's simply not an option. The people in Gaza are already refugees from places inside Israel, and they still want to go home. They still have the ancestral memory of their cities, towns, and villages. Perhaps heard the stories of some of the people who have been killed, including that's Khaled Nabhan and his granddaughter Reem, and then of course Rajat has just become a film, her actual voice. So there's a poster about that comparing her situation to Anne Frank. So anyway, we can talk more about this in the question and answer period, but when you talk about where to go from here with all that's happened, the one thing that I have never supported is a two-state solution, and I can tell you why, because every Israeli thinks of the whole land as Israel, and every Palestinian thinks of the whole land as Palestine. And from their own perspective, they're both right. So what do you do with that when two peoples have claim to the same land? And of course, there is a historic connection of Jews to the ancient land of Israel and all that, and especially religious ties. But lots of people have religious ties to Palestine or other places. That doesn't mean that gives them the right to take over the land and bar other people who are indigenous to the area from living there or calling it home. So again, that is the message that I reiterate over and over in my book. And again, this is the wall in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is mostly surrounded by a wall, and I keep coming back to the fact that change is inevitable. And if the Berlin Wall can fall, if apartheid in South Africa can fall, if there can be peace in Northern Ireland, then certainly we have our work cut out for us, which is really to just challenge that notion of Jewish supremacy from the river to the sea. As long as Israelis are hanging on to that notion of Zionism that promises the land only to the Jews, then we will continue to have a problem. It's really not that complicated. It was a recipe for disaster that many of the early Zionist leaders recognized, but they pushed their agenda through, and they were actually quite successful. There's lots of things that we can do, and we can talk more about that. I actually put together a resource sheet, which I can send a link in the chat once I'm done with the presentation, about things that you can do to make a difference in this situation to move it along. But certainly it's important to recognize that everything that we address for Palestinians, we're actually addressing for all of humanity. We've seen the way the environment in Gaza in particular has been desecrated through the bombings. We've seen the way the people's health care has been destroyed, housing, education, the economy, the quality of the land and the water, certainly the safety and security that Israelis demand is never afforded Palestinians. the right to self-defense that Israelis demand is never afforded to Palestinians. And so we really need to look at what it means to have civil and national rights, to respect international law, and to get past this exclusive Jewish state that is wreaking havoc on the region, not just on the people of Palestine. I want to share this map with you too, because this map was created by Salman Abu Sitti, who is a geographer and also quite prominent Palestinian author who is from a village in the envelope area around Gaza. He grew up in Gaza, was never allowed to return to his village, even though he could have just walked there. And so one thing he points out is that 80%, I'm going to say this twice, 80% of Jewish Israelis live on 20% of the land. So 80% of Jewish Israelis live on 20% of the land. What does that mean? So this map shows the blue circles are concentrations of Jews in what is now Israel. And the red dots are those villages that I showed you earlier that were black dots. Those are the destroyed villages of what is now in Israel. And as you can see, most of those villages are actually in open areas. And so the feasibility of the right of Palestinians to return to their lands, to their homes, is actually very high. And there's always this sense that, there's nowhere for people to go, and that Palestinians who return to a future Palestine/Israel would have to go to the Palestinian areas, which are designated as the West Bank and Gaza, when these are not places that these people are from or want to go back to. So why should any Jew anywhere in the world have the right to come to Israel, go live in a settlement in the West Bank or anywhere in what is now Israel with zero restrictions, whereas Palestinians are not allowed to return to their homes? So this notion of the right of return, which I think addresses your question, Samar, from the beginning, is an important one. And it is a small land overall, but there's definitely room for people to come back. And, that's all people want. They want to be able to live. Palestinians want to be able to live with dignity in their homeland. And the homeland is Palestine. And if Jewish Israelis want to successfully make Palestine their home, then they need to recognize and honor what Zionism has done to this land and to these people, and find a way to right the wrongs of history. That's all there is to it. I mean, Israel's really good at creating facts on the ground, but that doesn't undo the historical realities. So I just wanted to share that with you as a final thought. And I think it's important to have hope. There's lots of organizations that are working to educate and to show people the other side. Obviously, there are a lot of important historical narratives out there, but the more information we have, and we have access to more information than ever before, I think the more likely it is that we can move forward with some kind of peaceful future. So this is a photo from Silwan, which is one of the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem that is constantly under attack by Israel trying to Judaize Jerusalem and drive out Palestinians. Obviously, there's been a lot of people speaking out around the world on this topic and why have they done that? Because they've educated themselves. They've deepened and broadened their understanding of history. I think Israel had a lot more leverage over the narrative, a lot more control over the narrative in the past, and that has opened up with the internet, with people's access to communicate with each other. And so educating yourself, connecting the dots into other issues and moments in history, building coalitions, getting involved in local actions and protests, supporting humanitarian organizations, just disrupting the status quo, that we can somehow normalize occupation, apartheid, and genocide. that just simply has to be, we need to have that in the spotlight. And so it's really just about demanding an end to an Israeli occupation. I have, again, a handout I can send you with these details. So I'm not going to, and that is kind of the impetus for the BDS movement, which really addresses the successes of bringing down apartheid in South Africa and trying to model their efforts after that success. So that's the reason there is something called the BDS movement, which focuses on the boycotting of Israeli products and cultural institutions, divesting from companies that support the occupation, and sanctioning the Israeli economy so that it can't just exist as a normal state, given what it's doing. And of course, at the end of the day, never stop talking about Palestine. And my father-in-law was actually a watermelon farmer. And so there's one poem I want to read you that I wrote about him, and then we can open it up for conversation. Here's an ancient olive tree. There's, the challenge right now is for Palestinians just to stay connected to their land and be able to cultivate the land. These are photos of family and friends and farmers in the West Bank near Jenin, where my extended family lives. And we have an olive oil export company there to connect the world with people with what's going on. So I'll just read a poem and then we can open up for discussion. So this poem is called Sidi's Land, and Sidi is the Arabic word for grandfather. So that's what my children would call their grandfather in Palestine. And this really speaks to the days of the Nakba and the connection to the land. That spring, the earth drenched with winter rains, Sidi planted his fields with sesame and watermelon as he had done many a times before. The sun warmed the earth, calling the seeds to sprout, press through the rich brown soil, the color of cacao, glowing green as they reached for the sky, carrying with them what they were to become. How Sidi rejoiced as his seedlings grew into formidable plants, blossoms becoming fruit, the transition almost undetectable, so seamless. Those watermelon bursting with shades of green would never know the hands who cultivated the earth. Lines drawn in secret agreements, declaring these fields no longer ours. Like a child taken from its mother, the watermelon lay on the other side of the line, calling out, "Where are the hands who set me into the soil? Who will pick our fruit, rejoice in the harvest?" Instead, conquest of the land, the fruit a prize for the taking, the winter rains long past, now only tears of dispossession trickling down Sidi's cheeks, tears of separation from the land that he loved, that he served, that remain in his gaze but out of reach, unable to put out the fire of injustice, sparked into a flame, nourishing the next generation to remain on the land, to return to the land, to care for the land, never forgetting we are of the land. So that's a taste of my poetry that I've been writing the last couple of years after writing such a long book. That's the best I could do. And this photo is of me in the village of Romani with my sister-in-law and her daughters and grandchildren. Many of their lands and trees have been taken or destroyed because they are right along the green line, which is where the wall is built.